you, citizens of the world. It's Michael James once again with another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. And we are recording this on Monday, March 4th for the week of March 9th. And we're really glad that you've tuned in or you're watching us. Today's guests are going to be our friends Alan Mills from the Uptown People's Law Office talking about what happens to people in housing when they come out of prison, as well as some things going on in prison that their Uptown People's Law Office is dealing with. And then we're going to have Thom Clark, one of our sometimes hosts, sometimes producer, talking about things local to global. A couple of good things I want to start off with. It's a personal note. I want to give a big shout out to two of my kids. I have a lot of kids and I love them all. They're all doing well. But Casey Blue James just finished her 6th marathon. She finished the Tokyo Marathon yesterday when we're recording. And then Katie and Lake James, some of you know I used to play Twin Peaks all the time. He's been a guest on the show since he was a little kid. He's in Hanoi. He had been in Bali along with Whitney, the band. He was filling in for a friend, and now he's doing a record release over in Hanoi. I talked to him last night. He's all suntanned, sunburned actually. And his new album, Lake J, came out this past Friday, and it's called Dizzy, and you can find it at YouTube, whatever, you'll find it. On some other good things, I read an article in the New York Times this last Sunday about a football club in North Belfast, and there's a team called the Bohemians, and the article talks about how they have become so popular with their activism, whether it's LGBT, whether it's around Palestine, immigration. It's a soccer club with fans that are clearly progressive, and it's a good read. Following up on that, I sent it to Russ Bradford, the former basketball coach, basketball talent judge, and the writer. I did do the photographs for his book, Patty on the Hardwood. When Russ was coaching over there in Ireland, he's over there now working on a book about Syrian refugees. And he followed up my information on the Bohemian Football Club with a thing going on in Belfast that where a soccer team is welcoming all the Syrian and Nigerian refugees and really including them in local activities. So those are some good things. On the more negative note, we have really serious issues in Gaza, as well as in the Ukraine. It is good that Vice President Harris did finally call for the ceasefire, and let's hope something happens. And we're glad they're dropping some supplies in, although it's not a really effective way to deal with the hunger that so many people in Gaza are now facing. And on a negative note, on a personal negative note, I drive a 2002 Mitsubishi Montero. It was a gift from my niece and nephew when my brother Bo died. We call it Bo's Beast, and it's been a real workhorse of a vehicle. I was coming home from the YMCA and registering the car and doing a bunch of errands the other morning. I was heading east on Greenleaf, going through a green light when a woman in a Buick came through the red light at a rapid speed. I turned sharply to the left to avoid being T-boned, but it really took out my front fender, the wheel, and as I swung around, my back end too. So given all that, I might be looking for a vehicle. Keep me in mind. On the sports front, I already talked about the soccer teams, but there is a lot of drama going on around who will be the Bears quarterback. And there's a lot of push from these wealthy owners of our sports teams wanting new stadiums and wanting people to pay for it. So it made me think of an earlier guest we had named Sean Dinsis, who did a book called Bulls Markets when the Bulls got the United Center all built up and rebuilt, whatever happened, and all the promises they gave to the community, which didn't necessarily come true. So I think that's enough, little bit of a banter. We're going to hear a little bit of Katie and Lake James's new music, Lake J, Dizzy, and we'll be right back with our first guest, who will be Alan Mills of the Uptown People's Law Center. Okay, now we're about to have our first segment and our first guest of the day, the one and only Alan Mills from the Uptown People's Law Center. He's no stranger to this show. In the past, he's come on, he's talked a lot about prisons, and I think we're going to talk about that a bit today. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where and what time it is. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing great.
So
it's always a pleasure to come back to the show.
You're always welcome. And if you have something you want to get on in a hurry, just tell me. I'm ready. The more help I get, the better. Prisons is something that's not in the not talked about as much as we would like it to be talked about, and the attention paid to it is not as much as it deserves. How about you filling us a little bit in on what's going on in the Illinois prison system and some of the work that you and the people at Uptown People's Law Center are doing?
So we're doing a whole bunch of stuff on prisons. The Uptown People's Law Center has been dealing with prisoners since its founding in the mid-1970s. The people who founded the Uptown People's Law Center before my time very much believed that when people from the community went into the jail or went into the prison, they were still their neighbors, they're still part of the family, and therefore were still part of our community that we represented. So since that time, we have represented prisoners. It has expanded so that it's now about half of what we do is represent prisoners, and representing prisoners has now begun to bleed over into some of our other work, like housing and Social Security. The first thing I want to talk about today is, in fact, how it's bled over to some of the housing work we did. So Cook County, actually led by our current mayor, but back when he was the commissioner, passed what's called the Just Housing Amendment, which generally, and I can get into details in a minute, generally prohibits housing discrimination against people with a criminal record. So that was driven by the fact that people come out of prison, and one of the things they absolutely need is a place to live. If you haven't got a place to live, then you're likely to go back again because you're on the streets. So now it's generally not legal to discriminate against people because they have a criminal record in Cook County.
And is everyone who goes to Cook County it has a record? Is everyone protected? Any kind of record?
Not quite. So the law has sort of two exemptions. One, it has totally exempted sex offenders for no particularly good reason based on the data, but in order to get it passed, that's the only thing I had to do. And politics is all about the art of compromise. So they had to exclude all sex offenders from the coverage. So if you have a sex offense, this law is not going to help you at all. The second thing is recent criminal conviction. So any criminal conviction or even arrest or anything else more than 3 years old, they can't look at it at all, period. Doesn't matter what it was for. Doesn't matter if you committed murder. If you committed murder 30 years ago and you got out of prison yesterday, they can't even look at the fact you committed murder. Anything within the last...
They'd be able to get housing.
They'd be able to get housing, right. They're completely covered by this law. You can't discriminate against them. Anything within the arrests within the last 3 years, anything that wasn't conviction, they also can't look at it at all. Actual convictions in the last year, within the last 3 years, they can look at, but they have to be able to show, landlords that is, have to be able to show that excluding you would have some direct connection to the safety of the building, the health of the other residents, et cetera. So it can't just be a blanket saying we don't rent to anybody with criminal records within the last 3 years. They have to make an individualized determination of whether or not you, with a particular crime you committed, would jeopardize the safety of the building.
So this law is already in effect?
Yes.
And how many people have benefited from the law?
Well, we don't really know that. We at the Uptown People's Law Center are one of the two organizations that are sort of formally enforcing this, or taking the lead in enforcing it. Between the two of us, I think we have succeeded in about 25 cases. However, most of those weren't formally filed. Most of them are resolved informally before you have to file an actual complaint. And part of the reason, and there's no way therefore to track those. So I don't know how many people have benefited from the law. I don't know how many landlords are complying voluntarily with the law. We are concerned that not enough cases are getting filed, and that's one of the reasons I want to talk about it on the show today, is make sure more people know about this case or more about this law, because most people, either landlords or tenants, don't know it exists out there. But you asked the question of how do we prove it, and actually the law is really well written in order to help that. Landlords can't even ask about a criminal background until after they've decided you are otherwise eligible for the apartment. So if they ask about it, then that means they've already decided you can rent it. So therefore, if they then turn you down, it has to be because of your background. There's no other reason. So they can't, if they ask on the like application form, if they have a checkbox, have you ever been committed of a crime? That is a violation of the ordinance. If they run a background check before they have decided you're eligible for the apartment, that's a violation of the ordinance. So all these things make it much easier to enforce the Just Housing Amendment than it would be in normal discrimination cases where you have to prove that that was the motivating factor.
Alan Mills, let me ask you, who were the sponsors in the House and the Senate of this bill?
It's not the House and Senate. This is the Cook County Commissioners.
Cook
so
County
it only applies in Cook County.
Oh, this is just, I apologize. I should have done my research a little more. So this is just Cook County. It's not the state of Illinois.
Right. I mean, you can get out of prison anywhere, but it only applies to housing in Cook County. So it was done by the Cook County Commissioners. It was Commissioner Brandon Johnson, who is now obviously our mayor, who was the main sponsor in the county board. And then the Sergeant Shriver Center and several other groups are the ones that really pushed it through and got it passed.
Let me ask you, have you had any really great successes in this that you want to share with the masses or tuned in or watching?
Yeah, I mean, part of the issue is what counts as housing. So there are a number of things that are called SMRFs, SMRHFs, they're not little blue people. These are specialized mental health treatment facilities or something like that. I can never remember what the acronym stands for. But basically, there are places where people can have residential care. They live there and they get their mental health care in these facilities. So we had a person who was in prison, stuck in prison because he hadn't got anywhere to go because he needed some specialized mental health care to get out. So he was stuck in prison. We found one of these organizations that he could go to and had a vacant spot. And then they turned him down because of his criminal record. So we sued them, and their defense was, well, we're actually a treatment facility. We're not a residential facility, and therefore we're not covered. The county board ruled otherwise. They ruled that because people live there, it counted as a residence. So first of all, that has benefited a lot of people who would be otherwise stuck in prison because they haven't got a mental health facility to go to. And hopefully it would expand it to other places, like, for example, nursing homes. Should not be able to discriminate against people with criminal records, which historically they have done. And it means that there are a whole lot of people stuck in prison who really have physical or mental disabilities so that they can't just go out and get their own apartment. They need some sort of specialized care. And those have been people who have been historically very hard to find housing for. So many of those people are stuck in prison just because of their disability. So hopefully this success will open up the doors so more people can go home when their sentences are over.
I'm going to throw in this. Are there any people who have gotten housing and then have lost it again because of more criminal activity?
Not that we're aware of. I'm sure it's going to happen. And I'm sure when it does happen, some people will jump up and down and say this is a terrible law. But people have to remember that, no matter what we do at this point, 50% of the people who come out have a new involvement with criminal law. So, the fact that one or two people may, under this particular ordinance, shouldn't in any way mean that the ordinance is a bad idea. It's definitely, in my opinion and those of other experts, will cut down on the number of people who go back to prison.
Let's hope so. Have you, what are the hurdles in enforcing this law that you find that you have to confront?
I think the biggest hurdle is people don't know about it. Last year, there were only 12 cases filed before the commission, the Human Rights Commission, that enforces this. And I can't believe that's because every landlord in the city is complying with it. I think it's because tenants don't know their rights, and therefore they are not complaining when they get turned down. Anybody who has such a complaint should contact us at the Uptown People's Law Center, UPLC at uplcchicago.org, and we'll be happy to look into it. And if there is in fact a violation, take up your case.
Well, in closing on this part of our discussion, why is this a good law?
It's a good law because it helps people stay out of prison and get out of prison. Prison is not good for anybody. And certainly once you have served your time, once you've paid your penalty, it shouldn't be a lifetime disability. There's no reason in the world why people who get out of prison should be forced to be homeless. And that is unfortunately happens way too often. If you look at the homeless encampments all over the city, and they're growing, you'll see a remarkable number of people that have spent some time in prison or otherwise or Cook County jail.
Well, let's. This is good. So this is the Just Housing Amendment, and it's Cook County the board got it through, and it's going on, and a number of people have benefited, and we'll see. It sounds like a really good thing to me. Let's switch a little bit. You're up in the prisons. You do a lot of work with prisoners and issues around prisoners' rights, etc. What do you got going on? You have a new case going on that has to do with something like out of our negative historical past with poll taxes and literacy tests and that kind of thing. What's
Yeah, I
happening?
mean, so I think anybody who looks at the prison system or our criminal justice system broadly is aware that it's an extremely racially biased system. There's no question that there's an overrepresentation of Black people and overrepresentation of all people of color in our criminal justice system in general. Anybody who walks through Cook County Jail will immediately see that the vast majority of folks in there are Black, and very few white people are in that prison or in that jail. Same is true of the prison. So the lawsuit we just filed has a tiny little piece of that. Several years ago, the Illinois legislature passed a law saying that everybody who's getting out within the next 6 months out of prison should have the opportunity to take a civics class. And they said that the most effective way to actually teach those civics classes was for other prisoners to teach them. Each one teach one, an old thing from the 60s, right?
I like it.
So that's applied here in the prison. So there was a man who, Centralia Prison in downstate Illinois, was teaching one of those classes. And he got to the point where they were talking about the pre-civil rights era, so the 40s, 50s, and 60s in the South, and how they used various methods to try to suppress the Black vote. He was talking about the literacy tests and the poll taxes. As he was having this discussion during his class, the prison official who was in charge of sort of monitoring the class, he wasn't teaching it, but he's supposed to be there, interrupted and said, "You're lying to them." He said the literacy tests had nothing to do with trying to suppress the Black vote, that they were completely race neutral, and the only reason we had them was to ensure that people knew what they were voting for. So my prisoner, Mr. McNeil, said, "No, that is not true. These were clearly racist." And then the guard again interrupted and said, "No, they're not racist, and you're talking about racism in this class is divisive. You shouldn't be talking about racism. You should be just talking about voting and voting rights without any racial background." So he insisted on talking about it. He got a disciplinary report. He was barred from teaching the class anymore. And the prisoner has since then, and it's now been over a year, not been allowed to have any other job at Centralia. So he just sits in his cell all day long. So he's essentially been blackballed because he refused to lie about literacy tests being racist.
Wow. So how come prisoners are teaching other prisoners in the first place? Is this something that goes on in our prisons?
Almost never.
Yeah.
I mean, it happened. This was unique, and it was pushed by a lot of folks who thought that people getting out of prison weren't even aware that they were allowed to vote, because in many states, of course, they aren't. And that's made a lot of press nationally. So a lot of people get out of prison think they're not allowed to vote, or they don't know who to vote for, or they don't think voting matters. So the legislature thought it'd be a good idea that people getting out of prison should be educated as to what their voting rights are, as to what the history of voting is, the struggle for voting rights, to understand that this was not just a gift that was given to people, that people actually went out there and fought, and in some cases died in order to ensure that everybody had a right to vote. And they thought the most effective way to get that message across was to have other prisoners, each one teach one, rather than having a bunch of guards try to impart that knowledge to prisoners, which would never really work.
It's really surprising that this, you would think that people knew the history of voting rights in this country and the civil rights movement. This is, wow, it's blowing me away. Was this a rogue officer? Yeah, tell us about the officer that did this.
I mean, I wish I would say it was a rogue. I mean, but we tried to resolve this informally. We contacted the chief legal counsel of the Illinois Department of Corrections, who didn't take any action. My client filed a formal grievance, which went all the way up the chain of command to the director's office, and they refused to do anything about it. So this has been endorsed by the highest levels in the Department of Corrections. Now, I'm not sure anybody actually believes this. The head of the Department of Corrections right now is a Black woman. So I find it hard to believe that she actually believes this. But I think that what's really happening here is it's very much embedded in the racism that underlies the entire system. And unfortunately, we have candidates running for office. I mean, this happened well before, but we filed the lawsuit shortly after. Nikki Haley gave this response to the New Hampshire presidential primary, where she was asked the cause of the Civil War and refused to say anything about slavery. And then you have people like Ted Cruz in Texas talking about how slavery was actually good for people. And Ron DeSantis saying that slavery meant that people got training and skills they wouldn't otherwise have. So you have a section of this country now who is trying to rewrite that history and trying to erase the entire struggle for civil rights as if it didn't happen. And I think, this is deep Southern Illinois. The prison official who was involved was white. It's the heart of Trump country. I mean, people think about Illinois as being a blue state, but if you look at the map, in terms of acreage, there's a bright red sea south of Chicago. And Centralia Prison, where this happened, is in the middle of that bright red sea.
Was this a prison official or this guard who was monitoring the class? Is he in a union? And
he is. AFSCME is the union that represents all prison employees. So he is absolutely part of AFSCME.
It's sort of always a contradiction that you have, there are certain unions, and we root for unions, but there are a few of them that really are usually on the wrong side and protect them from while they do the wrong thing.
I mean, AFSCME is not usually on the wrong side.
No.
AFSCME, the real irony here is AFSCME was the one that was doing the garbage strike when Martin Luther King went down to support and was assassinated. That was AFSCME that organized that strike. And here they are denying the fact that the Voting Rights Act needed to be passed for anything. It's just the most ironic thing in history.
Well, what are your next steps? What are you going to do about this?
Well, we just filed a lawsuit. It's a brand new lawsuit, so we don't have a date or anything. It was assigned to a judge in the Southern District. The next thing that will happen is the defendants will be served, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not they are willing to stand up and actually say in court what they said in the classroom, which is that literacy tests were in fact race neutral. I would be very surprised if they take that position in court, but we shall see.
What would you like people to do who may be listening and wanted to, take a little bit of a stand or to help you all take a stand on this issue? Well,
the first thing I would, just for people's curiosity, we dug out a copy of the actual literacy test that they used in Louisiana, attached it to our complaint, and it's now or will be within the next hour or so on our website. So take the test. I took it and I could not pass. I suspect that you would have a hard time passing it as well. It's a 10-minute test, 10-minute time limit. And if you get one question wrong, you fail. You can't vote. I failed. I couldn't finish it in 10 minutes, let alone get them all right. And they weren't questions. They had nothing to do with literacy whatsoever. It's like draw a line going, 2 over the next dots and 2 under the next dots, and 1 above that. It's understanding complex directions. But more generally, what can you do to support us? The Uptown People's Law Center is always looking for donations. We are a donation-driven place. We are not-for-profit. Our website has a button, so you can go to our website either to learn more about either of these things I just talked about. Lots of resources on our website, and each of our pages has a donate button. So check out what we're doing, click that donate button, and help us keep doing it.
Well, Alan Mills, this is good. It's always good talking to you. I know that we put on here to maybe talk about the White Sox and a little bit of racist history about financing a stadium. And now there's a call for new stadiums and stuff. So we're going to have you back. And of course, we'll have you back anytime you want to share some information on these cases that you brought up today. The one about prisoners in a class and talking about literacy tests and racism, and the other about people being able to get housing when they come out of prison.
Happy to do that. And I definitely should come back and talk about the White Sox shortly. So we'll figure out a date to do that.
In the sports section, there's a guy named Sean Densis who was on this show years ago, and he did a book about the United Center and how that got built and all the promises they made to the community that really haven't happened. Okay. Yep. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back with Live from the Heartland. We're going to hear a little bit of music from the band Lake J, which is actually my son, Katie and James, and who I talked about earlier in the opening. And we'll be right back with a little bit more Live from the Heartland with the one and only Thom Clark coming on. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of March 9th. And as many of you know, we are recording it a few days early. So some of the news we'll mention is stuff that is just happening. And hopefully it won't be too out of date by the time you hear it. And it's an honor and a pleasure, and I always say that when he's coming on, the one and only Thom Clark, who once in a while will help host the show. He's certainly an advisor, kind of a producer of the show, and I get him on at least once a month now, talking about all things Thom, what he sees going on out in the world from the local to the global. So hello to you, Thom Clark.
Hello, having a good day, I hope, Michael.
So far, so good. I did report a little bit earlier about having my car in an accident, but we'll save that. That we already did it. So there we go. Let's start with the weather. We're here on a Monday, and it's still kind of warm out for wintertime. It just our Sunday was up near 70 degrees. People have been out and about, but you got stuck in a blizzard. Where the hell were you?
Well, we weren't exactly stuck, but we accompanied our granddaughters and their parents to Colorado so that the parents could go skiing and we could spend some quality time with the young girls, 1 and 3. And
Nice.
our travels went well. They drove out. We flew out in the middle of our stay in the YMCA camp on the skiing side of the mountains out there. Just north of Winter Park, south of Granby, we got hit with a 5-inch blizzard. And I'll tell you, it was really blown and it reminded me of winters of yore because, boy, we're not having a winter in Chicago. And the same day you were having 70 degrees last week, it was 7 above that evening. Gorgeous sunrises, wonderful moonrises, but we could still see stars. It was really a special time. And
It's nice to be up there and up high, closer to those stars.
I think, as a friend commented, we Flatlanders need to see the mountains every once in a while. We try to get out there about once every 5 years or so because that's another whole country that we're not used to, particularly this non-winter we've had in Chicago.
Yeah, we've had a pretty light winter, except for a few weeks of really cold, and which did bust a couple of my pipes and stuff like that. Anyhow, let's go to something that's not as fun to talk about. There's a guy, the orange-haired guy, is been written off or taken off the ballot in a number of states up there in Maine, out there in Colorado, and in Illinois here. But what happened? The news just came in.
Well, the Supreme Court has unanimously rejected the notion that Colorado or any other individual state can keep Trump from being on the ballot. They say that that's a legislative function and it should not be up to each individual state, which would create chaos, or even in this particular decision, up to the court to decide whether or not the former insurrectionist is allowed on the ballot or not. It's not a particularly surprising decision. I guess I was surprised that it was a unanimous decision.
Yeah, me too.
They clearly directed Congress to take care of this. And as we know, Congress can't get much of anything done these days. We're in a week where there are continuing resolutions rather than permanent appropriations. That seems to be an ongoing story with this dysfunctional GOP. And we'll have to see what else Congress finds time for, like impeaching the sitting president with no grounds to do so, while they passed up the opportunity to do it with the insurrectionists.
We tend to have long been critical of a number of things, even when it's the Democrats in power, and we certainly have our criticisms of the current president. But we also know that he's done a lot of things that surprised people, done some really good things. But he keeps getting beat up in the polls, even when the other guys are just stepping in. You know what? We have the situation here where Biden is victimized because of his age when he is only a couple of years older from an erratic former president, the orange-headed guy with the fake suntan stuff on his face, where you could check it out, the line, when they get the camera angle. And What's your take on this age thing? I mean, I'm older than Biden, so I'm sympathetic to watching how he walks sometimes, but I also think he's pretty sharp and he doesn't make, really big mistakes like the orange head guy. I don't like to say his name.
I agree with you entirely. I think that the challenge is ageism is an easy story where journalists don't have to go out and investigate policies or actual record. This President Biden, will be seen by history, I suspect, as the most productive president, despite a split Congress, since LBJ. That's Lyndon Baines Johnson for you younger listeners and viewers.
BJ.
And he got bogged down by Vietnam. I'm afraid Joe Biden may get bogged down by his policy towards Israel and the impact on Gaza, though his own vice president over the weekend came out for a ceasefire, which many of us have been calling for because however the tragedy and terrorism of October 6th, the response has been out of proportion to the damage suffered by Israelis with the Hamas raid back in the beginning of October. This kind of police action, we haven't heard that term in recent years, but that's how I view this particular action is in my lifetime, I've never seen any of these kind of disputes ever solved by war. And the devastation that one government has brought on a country in the making in the Gaza Strip that's not much bigger than Chicago and has a very similar size population. 75% of Gazans have been displaced. And also out this morning was news that in the north, which received just incredible bombardments, 25% of the kids are malnourished. I mean, I just think it's time for a lot more than airlifts, which is a very inefficient, expensive way to provide relief. Biden should follow up on his vice president's call for a ceasefire and demand the border be open to let relief trucks come through freely without them being blown up by tanks when they try to provide supplies to really starving, impoverished people at this point who've been pushed all around the place. It's a very sad situation. We saw in the results in Michigan last week, the protest vote for none of the above that happened. That was primarily young Democratic voters and the significant Arab population that's in and around Detroit that basically said, we're not for this sitting president at the moment, given his policies in the Middle East. So Joe Biden's going to have to do something to clean up his act in the next month or two, or he's going to lose Michigan, and he can't afford to lose Michigan.
No, it's a big issue. We got to, and I think there's some people talking about an uncommitted vote here in the primary too. It hasn't taken the same kind of shape that it did in Dearborn, Michigan, but it's on people's minds. Let's, since we were talking about the orange-headed guy, what about his money problems? Because he's been rung up in court a little bit. The cha-chings are going up on what he owes, and he's trying to get out of it in a smaller payment. What do you got on all that and his challenges around money, and maybe the Republican Party's challenge around money?
The alleged genius billionaire now owes about $500 million to two different jurisdictions in New York, and he clearly doesn't have the cash. He complained last week that he was going to have to sell real estate in order to come up with the cash just to pay for a bond, because that's how it works in New York. If you're going to appeal a case, then you have to at least put the money up ahead of time or guarantee that the money will be available should you lose the appeal. Well, he can't even come up with, it's not chump change, it's actually a lot of money, but he can't even come up with the premium cost for a bond, much less actually pay the full amount of these fines. I think the guy's in a lot of trouble, and I think the primaries that he's winning also show weakening support. He has not, in any of these elections, as I've observed them, met his polling numbers. He has fallen short when the actual votes are counted. And that's my sliver of hope in this current chaotic environment where we have a real sociopathic autocrat wanting to take over. And he's freely said, I want to end the Constitution. I want to do massive deportation. Um, the list goes on of what he's already said on the record. So to go back to the ageism thing, um, I don't think the media has paid enough attention to the real threat we face as a not so young democracy anymore, but one the rest of the world is very scared is going the wrong way. And very scared within NATO that we can't even support and back up what we said we'd do in Ukraine. Uh, Putin is just chuckling now that his old buddy apparently may have a chance to win again. And all bets are off if that duo gets to run the world. I mean, I imagine even China is concerned about that kind of a dynamic, given some of the challenges they're facing economically. Their vaunted, fast-built middle class is really suffering under wage stagnation and a huge housing crisis. You don't hear about this much because the system is so different, but they they have some significant economic challenges, which is probably one reason we're hearing more saber rattling around the Straits of Taiwan, because there's nothing like a war to divert people's attention from reality.
Thom Clark, let me ask you, just do you have any take on these polls? I know a lot of people say, don't look at the polls, don't worry about it too much, but we all do. And I wonder if you had, they got these polls showing Orange had a couple of points ahead of Biden. What's your sense of the polls?
Well, first of all, polls at this stage are, again, cheap journalism, not really good reporting, because it's what I call horse race reporting. And there are two things about that. Number one, most voters aren't paying attention to this election right now as yet. In fact, many of them, I'm afraid, are getting tired of the chaos and the charges back and forth. Number two, most of these polls that refer to Trump being ahead by a couple points are national polls, which again are meaningless. This is a democracy that has this odd electoral college way of finalizing the vote for president, and that's a state by state vote. And so the really important polls to look at are swing state voters, and as well as trying to determine, again, way far out, we're 10 months away, 9 months, 9 months away from this election. Most people don't really pay much attention to what they're going to do on election day until after Labor Day. So we have a spring and a summer to get through before we can take these polls really seriously. And the only important polls to look at are the state by state results in swing state areas, because that's where the electoral college will be determined.
That's good to hear. And one more thing on the kind of national level before we shift a little bit to closer to home. The leader of the Republicans in the Senate is a guy named Mitch McConnell, and he's clearly starting to fall out of favor, and has a riff with Orangehead, but he also has enabled a lot of negative things to happen, and he just decided to not run again, or not always giving up the leadership of the Republicans in the Senate. Any take on him and what might happen and where that's going?
Well, ironically, it's one of the saner things I've ever seen Mitch McConnell do. He can lead pretty well, and he is on the outs with the Magna forces. There's no doubt about that, which is ironic because he basically delivered the Supreme Court to Orangehead, including not letting Barack Obama's last nominee even get a hearing, and then did a speed dating kind of thing with the latest nominee that got in there, the Notre Dame graduate Barrett, who's been kind of quiet since she's been on the court, but she is a freshman justice, and maybe that's best. But she's clearly voting with the conservative majority. I think it's curious, again, that everybody, including the liberals on the court, voted against this striking Orangehead from the ballot in Colorado, and that will have an effect here in Illinois as well as in Maine. We'll see that whole thing develop. But Mitch McConnell is almost solely responsible for the conservative shift in the courts, not only in the Supreme Court, but on the federal court level, district court level. He got a lot of judges appointed even before Biden came in during the Orange Heads years in office. And he's continued that trend, though a little less so given the nominations that Biden has made. But a lot of those nominations have been held up by Mitch McConnell. And so I think he's been rather spineless in challenging the magna forces of his old party. And I can't blame him for leaving the leadership of really a very chaotic party that has really lost its core principles. Mind you, this is the party of Lincoln, and we know what he did to wage and succeed with the Civil War. Practically all the stuff he stood for back 150 years ago, the current Republican Party has shunned. And I think what's most dangerous is the inward looking, where we want to get rid of all the immigrants who, of course, built this country. We want to align ourselves with other autocrats around the world rather than democratic forces. I mean, these are very dangerous trends that we ought to take seriously and make sure it doesn't happen. We have to make sure every living body turns out to vote.
I would hope that some reason McConnell resigns or something. Yeah, I don't want to get too far into it, but if it happens before, before his election, re-election, or he runs or someone else runs, the governor of Kentucky would appoint somebody. And I do like this guy, Andy Bashir, in Kentucky. I think he's someone to watch.
I agree.
Let's switch. Let's bring it on home. And one of the things that you've been working on, I've been working on, a lot of people in the neighborhood, particularly in Network 49, is Bring Chicago Home. And Bring Chicago Home will tax a real estate transfer tax over $1 million on one-time sale of a building. That money would go into a fund that would deal with homelessness in the city. And we need to deal with homelessness throughout the nation. But we had a situation where they've got some legal trouble now. What happened?
Well, without getting into the legal morass, the real estate interests with a lot of money behind them successfully challenged the way this referendum was posed. And the basic problem with the language in the referendum is that it calls for both a decrease in the basic tax rate for most of us homeowners, as well as a tiered increase for more expensive homes and property. And it's really the downtown office building and larger developer of shopping centers or Amazon warehouses that were very opposed to this because, again, that one-time sale means that they will pay a higher rate on the real estate transfer tax, which was seen by this 10-year campaign by the Coalition for Homeless as one of the best ways to have a dedicated fund to deal with this continuing big problem in our town, aggravated by the so-called migrant crisis. Some of those folks are trying to use the same beds to get shelter overnight. And while we've had a relatively mild winter, anything below 40, it's not very nice to have to stay out in. Plus, it would fund a lot of necessary needed supportive services, possibly even reopening some of those mental health clinics that were closed an administration ago. So I think the initiative is important for all of us to still vote on, if for no other reason to send a message about how we're willing to adjust this basic real estate transfer tax issue to make it more progressive and to help directly fund homeless programs.
One other thing that I want to bring up is the election. We have an election coming up real soon, and you can actually vote now, everybody. One of the candidates for the state's attorney position, now held by Kim Foxx, a true progressive, is open. She's not rerunning. And The Democratic Party has endorsed a fellow named Clayton Harris over a former judge named, I think it's
Eileen, yes.
Burke. There's some debate going on around who to support on that. And at first, I was leaning toward Burke after I saw our friend Don Rose come out and support her, saying that she had taken on the Catholic Church over sex allegations, et cetera, et cetera. Then our Democratic Ward Committee woman and also our state representative Kelly Cassidy put out a very detailed letter about how Burke had prosecuted a 5-year-old on a case, and it was pretty horrendous. Other people I know have talked to people who have a lot of favorable things to say about Harris. Today, I noticed that Julie Hamos, a former state senator who tends to be progressive, she came out for Burke. And I'm just wondering what your take is on the state's attorney race, what you know and what you might want to share.
Well, I'm a little surprised this race hasn't gotten more attention, given all the attention that Ms. Fox got during her 2 terms in office. Having said that, this is a case where I think it's important to follow the money. Very conservative Republican donors are the ones supporting Burke's campaign. It's one reason we're getting so many glossy 4-color brochures in the mail supporting.
And TV ads up the waz.
And you need to look at who is funding that effort. Clearly, they're scared of the independence Clayton Harris would bring to the office, are afraid of another progressive prosecutor in that office, and they're supporting with millions of dollars this former judge's campaign. So I urge people to pay attention to Clayton Harris for state's attorney and to ignore the advertising for Miss Burke.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm with you on that. One sad note, and I guess we'll finish up on that unless we'll have a little finale of happiness maybe. But up in our neighborhood at Potawatomi Park, where a lot of us have gone over the years to vote or participate in various things going on, there was a shooting just the other day. I think one woman was killed and 3 people were wounded. Apparently, the shooters were after somebody in the group. The young woman who passed was a visitor from Minnesota. I think her name was Keontae Gladney, and she was only 19. Any thoughts on this?
Well, it's another sad example about how we have too many guns in our society and in our neighborhood. Disputes that might have been settled with fists or a knife when we were growing up are now settled not just by a pistol, but by automatic weapons. And it follows the tragedy outside Senn High School just a few weeks ago. And the immediate neighbors in both cases are just baffled and saddened and scared, in all honesty. There was a quiet vigil on behalf of primarily the staff who particularly felt this. The shooting took place behind their field house. It was a wonderful ceremony that I think helped the staff understand that there were neighbors who were supporting them in their grief and their sorrow over what happened. But we have a bigger ongoing story to deal with in trying to get rid of automatic weapons from our society.
It was a moving ceremony. It was a number of people, and they had a prayer or a peace circle. I was there, and a lot of candles, and it was just another sad occasion. But it was good that some people came out to show their respect and their hopes for something different. We're out of time, Thom, unless you got some little upbeat words of enthusiasm or excitement that you want to share.
Well, I will just say that Rogers Park knows how to take care of its own. And like other crises in the past, the mutual aid that we're able to bring together to support people in grief, I think is a telling element of our neighborhood and something we should be proud of, even when it's over a sad issue.
Thom, it's always great to talk to you and to see you. Sometimes I see you in person, sometimes it's over to Zoom. Keep doing good in the world. Thanks a lot for coming on, Thom.
Have a great day, Michael. Take care.
Okay. And everybody else, I just want to say that our music today was a little bit of Kev Mo at the beginning. We're going to play a little bit of Chick Street Man as we go out. And in between, we're playing Lake J, which is Katie and Lake James. And I just want to say that if you want to check out last week's show, we had Katie Hogan on talking about Bring Chicago Home. And then we had Mariana Staropoulos, who is running for the clerk of the circuit court. And they both had good things to say. In memoriam, there's a woman, I knew her as Nancy Kay. Her name was Nancy Kaufman. And back in the early days of the Heartland Cafe, Nancy Kay had started a Small Planet catering business called Small Planet Catering. And we were very sorry to hear that she passed away. Okay, that's it. I want to thank everybody who made the show possible, from our guests, Alan Mills, Thom Clark, to our producers, Thom Clark, Katie Hogan, Lynn Orman, and to our engineer, Hal James. I'm Michael James. I'll be back next week. I'll probably have Katie and Lake James, Steve Hashimoto, and Peter Kuttner on. And then who knows who we'll have on the weeks after that. So you all keep doing good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we can do together.